All right. I believe we are now live and in living color. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the U.S. Departments of Education's, the Office of Postsecondary Education Student Services webinar today that's going to talk about social and emotional learning and how that is an essential foundation for post-secondary persistence and success. I know that you all are already very familiar with social and emotional learning, but we just want to have a conversation with you today just to share thoughts and ideas and to tell you some of the best practices that are currently out there in what we call the field. You know, Secretary Condona's main goal is that we have the best that there is to offer for our students, and that all students have the opportunity to succeed. His goal is that we will once again be the leaders in the world in terms of education. And I believe, as well as he believes, that in order to do that, we must take into account our students' social and emotional well being. Without those two, we cannot exist as a society, and we cannot be the strong leaders and develop the strong leaders that we need or have in our students. And not only that, but social and emotional learning has been found, the research has found that if you are socially and emotionally well, um, have a good foundation in that academically you will do well, you would do good as well. You know, it's almost like they tell you before you take a test, make sure you eat your breakfast so that you can do well on the test. Well, I also equate that with make sure you have good social and emotional foundation, and that will help you in your academics as well. So social and emotional is very important, so much important that when we had our competitions last year, we had a competitive preference priority that dealt with the students' social and emotional well-being. And so today we just wanted to have a conversation just to sort of provide you with a little bit more background on what exactly is social and emotional learning, and what are the benefits of it, and what does it do for us, and will it really help our students to persist in secondary school, as well as to persist in post-secondary and to succeed. And you know what? We want to make sure that you have the tools that you need, because in order for students to be able to be successful, they need you. And we know that you're there to lead and to guide them in the ways that they need to go. And by you helping to enrich their social and emotional learning, it will also help them to be academically successful. So that is why we are here today. And you know what? You know how we say you need to do an evidence-based type of practice or have evidence around whatever you're doing? Well, that's exactly, we take our own medicine. So today we have an expert with us today who is going to talk to us about social and emotional learning. So I'm going to introduce her to you all, and then after that, she's going to go ahead and just have a conversation with us and present on social and emotional learning. And then after that, we do have a question and answer. There's no live chat, but you can enter any of your questions into the question and answer chat box, and we will try to answer some of those at the end of the presentation. All right. Well, today, you all, we are very fortunate to have Natalie Waldron with us today. Natalie has an MBA, and she serves as the director of the Resilient and Healthy Schools and Communities content area at WestEd. In this role, she oversees the growth and dissemination of the agency's body of work related to creating safe, supportive, responsive, and equitable conditions in which every child, youth, and adult can learn, grow, and thrive. She also serves as director of the National Center to Improve Social and Emotional Learning and School Safety, which is also housed at WestEd. In this role, she leads the vision, strategic direction, and external engagements of the center. She leads a team of people who work nationally to build state and local capacity to integrate evidence-based approaches to social and emotional development and school safety with academic teaching and learning. It also deals with the school climate and culture and all the ways that children and youth experience school. She speaks and writes for the Center on Social and Emotional Well-being, Excellence, Alignment, and Coercions, and Equity. She brings to her work 25 years of experience in K through 12 education, finance, and strategy for both profit and nonprofit organizations. Prior to joining WestStat, she was an independent consultant serving mission-driven education of organizations, providing strategic planning, financial strategy, and broad effectiveness consulting. Excuse me. All of her engagements were guided by clients' aspiration of equity and race equity. She began her career working for 10 years in investment management and investment banking. She has served as a nonprofit chief financial officer, becoming an associate partner at New Schools Venture Fund, a California-based education venture organization. Additionally, she has served on several nonprofit boards. She is currently a member of Education Leaders of Color and serves on the board of Beyond 12. She earned her Bachelor's of Art degree in International Studies and International Business from Trinity University and her MBA from the University of Chicago, with concentrations in analytic finance and policy studies. So you can see that today we do have an expert in the field who's going to provide us with some good evidence-based research. So without further delay, Natalie, is all yours.
Baby, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And everyone, thank you so much for having me here today. I am truly delighted to be here. As Gaby mentioned, I'm the director of the Center to Improve Social and Emotional Learning and School Safety at WestEd. It is such a long name, we call it CISLS for short. But one thing that Gaby didn't mention is that I am the founding board member of a national nonprofit called Beyond 12. Beyond 12 organization that provides a technology-driven service to help young people who would be first in their families to attend college persist and succeed so that they can provide their families, contribute to society, and break the cycle of poverty for the next generation. So all this to say, your work that you are leading is near and dear to my heart, and I am really grateful to be with you all here today and to celebrate the work that you're doing. So let me just arrange my slides here. Okay, so as we get started, I would love for you all to take a moment to think about your own journeys and trajectories and think about what it took for you to persist and succeed in your education. And in particular, think about the person who or people who supported you. Think about how they helped you find the experiences and create the environments that helped you on your way. And as you think about that person, I know that you can't share in the chat, but just hold them in your heart through this presentation and to invite them into this room with us today. So I want to start off with talking a little bit about our why. And for me, my why in this work at the nexus of social and emotional well-being and college persistence and success is about closing the gaps that we see between young people who are first in their families to go to college, who are often from under-resourced communities or from minoritized backgrounds, and their wealthier peers. So I want to start off with a little bit of data. I promise I only have a couple of slides with data. But if you look at this one, you can see in the first box, the data show that if you're first in your family to go to college, you are twice as likely to leave college before the end of your second year. And this compares to your peers who may have a college-educated parent at home, right? And then in the second box, you can see that only 1 in 6 students from the bottom income quartile actually graduate and earn their degrees, whereas 4 in 6 students in the top income quartile finish their degrees. And then the next slide that I want to share with you is about the impact of COVID-19. And certainly we are seeing the impacts continue to trickle in as we look at persistence and success, but we can already see that COVID made things worse. And with COVID, it exacerbated the inequities that we were already seeing. So here's 3 more data points for you, and I think we are able to share slides at the end of this presentation, so you'll be able to see those citations in tiny font at that slide when you have it in front of you. Okay, so going from left to right, let's look at the first square. It starts with enrollment. So this first square shows that enrollment in college for students from under-resourced communities declined 15% year over year from 2019 to 2020 when the pandemic started. And this decline was 30% lower than students from well-resourced communities. So while enrollment declined during the pandemic for everyone, it was significantly worse for students from lower income backgrounds. Then the second square focuses in particular on the experiences of Black students. So enrollment for Black students declined at a rate of 1.5 times greater than the national average. And then this third square focuses on persistence. So what we've seen so far is that Black and Latinx students are 40% of those who stopped out, but only 20% of those who re-enrolled. So persistence and success measures are typically calculated over 4 to 6 years, as I'm sure you all know, and we're only 3 years out from the pandemic, so we don't have official data on COVID's impact on persistence and success. But these early data indicate that when we get the official data in 2026 and 2027, we're going to see that disparities that are already wide have widened significantly. All right, so let's talk about today's goals. We have just 3 goals that you can see here. The first is to define social and emotional learning and why it matters to college persistence and success. I also want to connect social and emotional learning with equity and with our work to make sure that every young person is persisting and succeeding in college and are successful in career as well. And then the third is to provide some practical, concrete strategies for promoting equitable social and emotional learning. All right, so the next slide, sorry, just bear with me, is our agenda. Oh dear. Okay, here we go. Hopefully now you can see this. So the agenda pretty much maps to the goals that we have. I want to do a quick introduction of CISLs, the center that I direct, and then we'll talk about the definitions of social and emotional learning. It's more complicated than you might imagine. Its connection to equity, and then we'll end with SEL in practice. So we started off with the reflection question about who supported you in your persistence and career journeys. And I wanted to share my answer with you. So this next person that you can see is a picture of Mrs. Punch. So Barbara Punch taught me both kindergarten and 6th grade. So at my elementary school. So she has been in my life for a very long time. This picture is a little over 10 years old, where I went back home and was able to visit with her. So she was my teacher at my elementary school in Trinidad and Tobago, and I grew up in so Trinidad and Tobago is a small island off the coast of Venezuela, and I grew up in a small town on that small island called Mayaro. And Mrs. Punch, I know you can look at that face and see the strength in that face. I both adored her and was absolutely terrified of her. She has a really loud voice. So I am about 5'5". She's a small person. She's about 5'1" or 5'2", as you can see from this picture, but she commanded respect, and no one, not even the parents, dared to cross her. She held very high expectations for us. She expected our best work every single day. And I remember in particular a middle school assignment where we were asked to fill in a blank map of Trinidad with every river, county, city, and town on the island. And I took it home and labored over it for hours, brought it back the next day, turned it in, and she looked at my map with grave disappointment. And she asked me to do it all over again because she said it was too messy. And I remember exactly what she said to me. She said, "Natalie, this is a one and done thing. And I remember my eyes filling up with tears, and I took a fresh map from the stack on her desk. But when I returned with a better effort the next day, she was so proud of me, and it truly made it all worth it. And as much as I talk about how strict she was, she also thought my jokes were funny. I guarantee they were not funny when I was 11 years old. She talked to my mother like an old friend, and she cared very deeply about whether I and my peers were thriving. So in many ways, she reinforced in me the importance of persistence and success. All right, so let's jump in here with a quick introduction to the center. All right, so the center was funded by the Office of Safe and Supportive Schools at the U.S. Department of Education in 2018. And our purpose is to provide technical assistance to support states and districts in the implementation of social and emotional learning and other whole person evidence-based programs and practices. Our charge is to enhance the capacity of state educational agencies, who then enhance the capacity of the LEAs that they serve, who then support their schools. And I want to spend a little more time talking about our conceptual roots, and in particular, the science of learning and development. And I know if we were able to see faces, I would ask you all to give me a thumbs up if you've heard of the science of learning and development. I know often some people have and others have not, but these are the two conceptual roots for our center. So science of learning and development, people call it SOLD for short, is the evidence base about how learning and development in human beings happens. And fundamentally, the way this works is our brain synapses and ultimately our entire brain structure is actually formed through our experiences. And those experiences can be described by the quality of the relationships and environments that we experience and that are around us. So ultimately, human beings, children, adolescents, adults, learn, take risks, and can achieve at high levels in safe and supportive conditions and in the care of reliable adults that we can trust. So this process of experimentation and trial and error with the world around us is natural and instinctive. Many of you may have heard of the term of brain malleability. So this is the term that describes this idea that our brains adapt and change based on our experiences. And the cool thing about this, right, is that there are two phases in human development when brains are learning and growing really rapidly. The first, of course, is early childhood. We know that brains between the ages of 0 and 3 are like sponges. But one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that after the early childhood, there's a slowdown in brain malleability in middle childhood, and then there's a rapid increase again that happens in adolescence. And adolescence, researchers will describe as being between the ages of 11 and 24. So it's this time of incredible potential for young people and for the adolescents, the middle and high school students that you're serving, when with the right guidance and support, they can learn and develop at really high levels and thrive. It's a time of incredible potential. The second box is about equity, and we always follow up SOLD with equity because once we understand how learning and development happens as the adults who are teaching and caring for young people, we have to ask ourselves who our systems and practices are working for and who they're not working for. And that question, of course, always invites us to think about how we can shift our systems and practices to work in more authentic partnership with young people and families, to be culturally responsive and strengths-based, and to provide every young person we serve with exactly what they need, exactly their conditions to learn, grow, and thrive. So our center's technical assistance always is rooted in ideas about equity. Okay. Here is the next slide is about the conditions of learning and development. So we organize our TA in this conceptual concept that focuses on the conditions needed, right, for people to teach, learn, and thrive. And what we say is every adult with a meaningful relationship to a student has a role to play. So this is families and caregivers. This is educators in schools, educators out of schools, faith leaders, health and mental health providers, every adult with a recurring role in a young person's life. And so if you look at this ecological frame, you can see these three concentric circles, right? Our center builds knowledge and capacity in personal conditions for learning and development, which is within individuals, and that includes social and emotional well-being, mental and behavioral health, and adult well-being. And then that sits inside of the learning environment conditions, which might be in schools, might be in out-of-school time programs, which involves fostering safe, supportive, and equitable environments, responsive developmental relationships. It includes trauma-informed practices and resilience, restorative practices, and climate and culture. And then all of that sits inside of system conditions, which includes all of the ways that schools, out-of-school time providers, community-based organizations are all collaborating to serve young people. And the reason I think it's important to share this slide is because by taking an ecological approach, we are focused on the conditions that are created in which young people thrive. In that way, we're making sure that we're not blaming the individual or blaming the community. It's not about what's wrong with the young person or what's wrong with the community. It's about how are we creating conditions and environments and systems in which healthy learning and growing can happen. Okay, so let's move on to the next section, which is what is SEL and why does it matter? And as I mentioned at the outset, it's kind of a complicated question. Hopefully you can see this slide. The field is really fragmented. So if you ask people, what is social and emotional learning? What is SEL? If they can come up with a definition at all, you'll find that language is often imprecise and people use different definitions. So some people think of social and emotional learning as being about a specific framework or a program or a practice. And a lot of times when people identify the kinds of skills and competencies that reflect social and emotional learning, they'll point to hundreds of different ideas that you can see reflected in this illustration. So people might say, social and emotional learning is about critical thinking or growth mindset or self-awareness or goal setting or confidence, teamwork. None of these ideas are wrong, but they're certainly not clarifying because people are all thinking about things in different ways. So there was a really wonderful study that was done a while back. Let me see about the date. It was 2017, so about 6 years ago, by some researchers at AIR, and they performed a scan of the field. And what they discovered is there are multiple definitions in play about the concept of social and emotional learning. And as that graphic on the previous slide and is grayed out here shows you, there are hundreds of different competencies that people point to as reflections of social and emotional learning and well-being. And what has happened in the field is different institutes and agencies and organizations will organize these competencies into frameworks and offer them as a particular approach. And so they counted about 136 different frameworks. And what's challenging about this is sometimes these frameworks will refer to the same competency but use different names, or sometimes they'll use the same name for conceptually different competencies. So it's a fragmented field, and in some ways it is a confusing field. So the first thing that I want to offer you is this free tool out of Harvard University that I rely on all the time. It's really neat. As a center director, as a federally funded center, we do not promote any one particular framework or program or practice. We really ground our work in what it means to create those conditions by focusing on relationships and focusing on environments. But when people want to think about what are these competencies, to help them navigate it, we offer this really neat tool from the Harvard Taxonomy Project. We will share the link at some point. I know I can't drop it in the chat for you, but the purpose of this taxonomy project is it's intended to help researchers, practitioners, and policymakers navigate the broad range of SEL terms, definitions, and frameworks. So it includes 178 codes that are organized into 23 subdomains that fall into 6 domains. And what you can do with this tool is you can search different terms and find their definitions. You can crosswalk different competencies and you can learn more about frameworks. All right, so here we go. So what is SEL and why does it matter? As I mentioned, people use the term in multiple ways. Some people say, well, SEL is a curriculum. Other people say, no, it's a practice. They conflate it with things. And when we were awarded the center, the first thing we did was pull together all of the evidence-based definitions to come up with some language that could be really central and would be relevant and aligned to the work that's happening across the field. So what we say is, broadly speaking, social and emotional learning refers to the process by which individuals develop and learn the mindsets and competencies that achieve each of the circles that you see here. So it's about the mindsets and competencies that undergird personal purpose, that support healthy relationships, that help people develop a strong sense of place in their communities, help people be successful in school, whether it's K-12 or post-secondary, and in the workplace, and also help with engaged citizenship. So for us, it's not about having the right evidence-based program, though that certainly helps. Fundamentally, it's about creating conditions, you hear me say that over and over again, through relationships and environments that promote well-being and whole person development. All right, so here's why this matters. There is a large and growing evidence base that promoting strengths of these SEL mindsets and competencies has meaningful and significant outcomes over the short and long term. So as you look at these, you can see in the leftmost rectangle, in the short term, social and emotional competencies promote stronger mental health, healthy decision-making, and academic achievement, all so important for young people as they're going into their adolescence and in their high school years. Over the longer term, social and emotional competencies promote success in school and career, and you can see some examples here, such as high graduation rates, greater work experience, high employment status, and so on. And then ultimately, we see greater economic and life outcomes. There's evidence of lower costs associated with social services, lower costs related to medical resources, and greater labor market earning. Okay. All right, so in particular, there's been some great research about out of school time. So social and emotional learning is really important for out of school time settings. And there's a great organization called the After School Alliance that published a report in 2018 that identified all of these important ways that out of school time, including summer and school and after school and summer programming, promotes important social, emotional, and academic outcomes for young people. So this entire constellation, I think, is really powerful, and you see benefits here about improved grades, social behavior, attendance, college enrollment, and college completion. All right. So now we'll move on to social and emotional learning and equity. So of these hundreds of competencies, there are 3 competencies that are in particular being lifted up in the field as being particularly focused on equitable learning and development: agency, positive self-identity, and belonging. And so what I did was I went into the taxonomy tool that I described out of Harvard to pull some definitions for you all so that you can really see both the connections between social and emotional learning and equity, and hopefully the connections with your own work that you do. So belonging, I pulled this definition from the Clover model, and they define belonging as being about building strong relationships with peers and adults, with group acceptance, and with group identity. So the need for belonging is central to our early development in our attachment to caregivers and continues throughout our lives in a variety of ways. They remind us that human beings are social creatures and belonging is essential for both well-being and survival. The second definition is about positive self-identity, and this comes from transformative SEL out of Castle. I know you all are familiar with Castle. And Castle identifies identity as referring to how students and adults view themselves as individuals and as part of the world around them. And then they offer that having a healthy sense of identity is a buffer against negative or traumatic experiences and contributes to positive academic, social, and emotional outcomes. And then agency. So this definition of agency comes from Foundations for Young Adult Success, which was developed by the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. They do some really beautiful work in SEL. And they define agency as student agency describes the ability to make choices about and take an active role in one's life path, rather than being solely the product of one's circumstance. So when you put all of these things together, I wanted to offer this slide about what this means for our young people, right? When we are promoting the conditions, the experiences, the environments, and the relationships that support a strong sense of agency, positive self-identity, and when young people are welcomed into places of belonging, they can persist and thrive in adulthood and in college. They know they can learn and achieve at high levels. They know that their hard work will pay off. They possess a sense of self-worth, which can be an anchor for them in the face of challenges, which inevitably comes up in adulthood, and an engine for perseverance. And they belong in learning spaces. They know they belong in learning spaces that hold high expectations for them. All right, I'm coming to the end. I feel like I've been talking at you for a very long time, but I want to offer a few resources about what this looks like in practice. So we know that inequitable experiences are connected to inequitable outcomes. And so our center offers this guidance about adjusting program implementation to promote equity and social and emotional well-being. And starting at like around 11 o'clock on this image and moving to the right, what we offer is that that it's important to listen to your entire learning community. And that learning community includes educators, students, and families, and do that first before you take action in your program implementation. We encourage strengths-based approaches to planning, decision-making, and communication. We encourage you to embrace the values, histories, and relationships in the communities that you serve. We promote and offer strategies for co-designing, co-implementing, co-leading, and co-governing programs and initiatives with young people, families, and communities. Through inquiry and reflection, you can illuminate and disrupt the implicit and unfortunately sometimes explicit biases that may be held by people in positions of power. Through data collection and analysis, you can illuminate and disrupt organizational and structural inequities that may be found in policies and practices in schools and communities, and then also help young people claim their own power and lift up their communities. And then there is a resource that we developed. It's a tip sheet or a practice brief that includes a self-reflection tool for individuals and teams to think about whether your SEL practices are equity-centered. And there's 9 reflection questions. I won't read them for you here, but we can include these as well in the resources that you have. So hopefully all of this was of use to you and was helpful. Thank you again so much for having me. And I will turn it back over to Gaby for some discussion.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That was very informative and as well as inspirational. I think sometimes some of the things that you were saying, but it's always good to get a little reinforcement to help you along the way, because I know as practitioners, sometimes you can get a little discouraged when, you see your students and you're trying to help them and things are not going the manner, the outcomes that you desire. So sometimes it's good just to get together every now and then and just say, hey, listen, it's all good. These are some practices that you can incorporate. And we're going to go ahead and make sure that our students are successful. Everything that you basically talked about, Natalie, how, out of school programs, which are some of the programs that we have. We're not school based, but we pull students out of the school and we provide extra support to them. And so today, I hope that everyone who was in attendance has gained some additional insight into how important they are to a student's social and emotional well-being, and how if you take time to sort of listen to the students and then, you know, learn their values and their cultures, like you just said, and try to disrupt some of those, societal systems that have been set up in superiority, and sort of help your students see that they do belong. Give them that sense of belonging and that they can succeed. That will have greater outcomes for our programs as well as greater outcomes for the participant. And in the end, it'll be great outcomes for our society as a whole. So we want to thank you today for giving us a little bit more insight into social and emotional learning. And then I'm going to ask Jasmine, do we have any central questions that were in the chat, Jasmine?
Yes, we do. Natalie, can you repeat the definition stated for SEL?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. And I will also say, so I'll admit to everybody here, I am new to Microsoft Teams and discovered that I have access to the chat. So I just put the link to the Harvard taxonomy tool there for you all to be able to click through to. Okay, so the definition of SEL. So as I mentioned, there are lots of brilliant researchers out there who use slightly different language. But the language that I'm offering for us today is, broadly speaking, social and emotional learning refers to the process by which individuals develop and learn the mindsets and competencies that undergird personal purpose, healthy relationships, a sense of place and community, success in school and the workplace, and engaged citizenship. And I'm going to put this in the chat too. I'm mad with power now that I know I can put things in the chat. Wanted to say that, part of the reason that we use this definition is that, quite candidly, like so many things, social and emotional learning, that term, people have different feelings about it. Some people lean into it. Some people are uncomfortable with it. It's being politicized in some ways. And what we have really tried to do with the center is make sure that because it is about the work of relationships and environments, it is appropriate for every community's values, every community's context. And so we wanted to ensure that we were including the benefits that fit regardless of what angle you're coming into. So we know that for some people, they're really prioritizing engaged citizenship. Other people are thinking about purpose. Other people are thinking about relationships. So hopefully this is a definition that, regardless of the community that you're working with and the values they bring, they can see something important to them in this definition.
Thank you, Natalie. We have another question that says, can you be more specific about putting SEL to practice?
Yes, I can. And what I will say is, you know what, I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm telling you guys, I'm mad with power with the chat. So I'm going to answer the question, but I'm also going to put the center's website in the chat, and you can search the resources section of our website to find all kinds of resources that will support with this. So the question was about, can you be more specific about SEL in practice? And I think the number one thing that I want to promote is that, or that I want to offer you, is that promoting social and emotional well-being does not have to come just from buying a program. In fact, there are all kinds of reasons why why buying a program is not enough, right? It is really about attending to the quality of relationships that you have with the young people in your care and about the environments you create for them. So more practically speaking, when we talk about social and emotional learning and what it looks like in practice, it includes things. I'll give you a few examples. It includes things like, how are you welcoming young people into the space that you're offering them? Are you making sure that you know them all by name, that you know their stories, that when you come in, you greet them with eye contact and shake their hands, that you are asking them, making sure you're listening to what they're saying about what they're understanding about the work. There are ways in which, so for example, I really love project-based learning and performance-based education, which I know a lot of you all are doing in your programs. as a way to not only hold very high expectations for deep learning, but also for promoting their social and emotional well-being. So when you offer people the opportunity, when you offer your young people the opportunity to engage in learning where they are designing a project or researching something that's interesting to them, you're promoting the skills of agency, right? You're helping them, you're promoting the skills of critical thinking. You are helping to build their positive self-identity because you're saying what they are interested in, it can be relevant to the content that you're trying to offer them. There are so many examples. And what I will say is, if we get a pause, maybe after this webinar, there's some resources that you'll find on the website that offer specific strategies for integrating social and emotional learning and academic teaching and learning, that will give you some examples of what this can look like in terms of both your pedagogical approach to teaching and learning, as well as the actual curriculum that you might be selecting that is both about content and supportive of well-being.
Thank you,
Hopefully that was
Natalie.
helpful. Yeah.
We have another question that says, is utilizing restorative circles with students a good practice for them to feel a sense of belonging?
I love that question. I'm going to answer it, and then I'm going to find some resources to share with you. So restorative practices and restorative justice, we have a someone on our team, a member of key staff, who is an expert in this work. And yes, absolutely, those circles can be a way to promote a sense of belonging, to support, it can be a mechanism by which the participants in the circle, both the adults and the young people, are building their relationship with each other, building social and emotional competencies around perspective taking and empathy, and building a sense of community. I know that if my colleague Lauren Trout were here, what they would say is that restorative circles are not enough. What we see in practice is a lot of times people will say, well, I got this restorative justice practices program and I'm going to roll it out with the young people. But those programs are not as effective as they can be if you're not fundamentally dealing with the culture and climate of your learning space. So the example my colleague Lauren always gives is, if you, let me not say you, if there is an educator who is yelling at the kids from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. and is not trusting them and not valuing who they are, and then has a circle and then goes back to yelling at the children, then the culture of the space and the restorative practice are in conflict with each other. So we are big fans of restorative practices, but it needs to sit inside of a system that is really about a full culture of welcoming and belonging for young people, if that's helpful. And they wrote a resource. I'm thinking of all these resources to share with you. They wrote this resource called The Toolkit Before the Toolkit, that will help offer some activities and reflection to make sure that the conditions in your learning spaces are supportive of the restorative circles that you want to offer. So I'm multitasking and pulling this up here, but if you want to move to the next question, I can pull it up and share it in the chat.
Okay, great. The next question, one moment, I just saw it. How do we go about balancing SEL with academic preparedness and learning loss?
That's a great question. Okay. Okay, here is the toolkit before the toolkit, which is about creating the conditions for restorative practices. So this next question is about social and emotional learning, balancing it with academic learning and learning acceleration. So here is what I will say. I've always encouraged people to not think of social and emotional learning and academics as there being some sort of false dichotomy, right? The science of learning and development offers that as human beings, there are 4 domains of learning and development: social, emotional, cognitive, which deals with the academic piece, and physical. And what research, science, like all of the, like biology has taught us is those 4 domains actually develop together and in integrated ways. So when you think about Gaby's example of make sure you eat breakfast before the exam, it's because your well-being in one domain actually supports the well-being in the others, right? Young people will learn and achieve at high levels when all 4 of those domains are attended to together. Because if you attend to one and you don't attend to the others, you won't get the same outcomes. And the reason that is relevant is what we were offering at the beginning of the pandemic and continue to offer is the understanding that addressing social and emotional well-being is foundational to academic teaching and learning, and it has to happen together. So when I think about learning acceleration after a pandemic, if you want young people to really take off and thrive, you have to also make sure that they're feeling mentally well, that they have their communities around them, that they're feeling safe and supported, that they have everything that they need in terms of safe places to sleep and good nutritious food to eat, and are feeling cared for and are feeling healthy and whole. This is the idea of serving the whole person. And when that young person who is cared for in that way shows up for the exam, there's nothing they can't do. There is nothing they can't do. So the idea of balancing it is really about making sure that everything you're doing when you're teaching math or science or writing is also attending to helping young people feel safe and supported and feeling strong in their relationships with you. That baseline work is promoting their social and emotional well-being at the same time that you're holding high academic expectations for them. They happen together is what I would offer.
Thank you for that, Natalie. I think, Jasmine, we have time for one more question.
Okay, the next question we have is, what instructional methods are commonly used in SNL that TRIO professionals can implement as an out-of-classroom initiative?
Can you read that for me one more time?
Yes, what instructional methods are commonly used in SNL that TRIO professionals can implement as an out-of-classroom initiative?
Okay, so I'm wondering if the person meant in SEL.
SEL, yes.
Yeah, okay. So there are a variety of instructional practices out there, and I'm not sure that I can advocate for one over the other, but I will offer a couple of things that come to mind. So I know that a lot of practitioners really love universal design for learning, which is an equity-centered instructional practice that is about designing learning opportunities that have a variety of different ways that learners can engage with. That's really about differentiated instruction. And I think differentiated instruction is a strategy that helps promote social and emotional well-being. The other piece that I mentioned, what is project-based learning or performance-based learning, which is really about creating opportunities for young people to engage in rigorous content in ways that allows them to demonstrate their learning, to connect it to things that are relevant to their lives and their ways of being. And I love performance-based education, both because it's about deepening your learning of academic concepts and promotes social and emotional competencies as well. I am not sure that I gave the answer, that I'm answering the question that the person was asking, but this is what comes up for me. So I guess the final thing that I would say is if you click on our website and go to the resources section, there's a filter in place that where you can choose integration with academics, and we've curated and created a set of resources that I think will be particularly useful for that question. And there's one I'm going to drop into the chat here. It's called Integrating Social and Emotional Learning Throughout a School System. It's written for the district level, but it includes social and emotional learning resources and practices that follow a PDSA cycle. And then there are a couple more resources that I will put into the chat before we end today as well that I think will be helpful. Here's one that is instructional practices that integrate equity-centered SEL. And this will offer some examples of like curriculum and instructional practices that might be more helpful. You can peruse it and it might be more helpful for this person. Oh, I think I put a webinar in the chat. I'll find the resource in a second.
Natalie, we want to thank you today. This has been so helpful. And the way that you presented it is like, hey, we're all practitioners here together for the common good of ensuring that our students have a good foundation in terms of their social and emotional well-being. So thank you today. Thank you everyone for attending today. Natalie has provided us with several links, several resources that we can use. And I think we are also going to include a link to the PowerPoint presentation today. So once again, on behalf of the U.S. Department of Education, we say thank you, Natalie, and we thank everyone for attending today. And if you have any questions or anything else that you would like to know about social and emotional learning, just contact your program specialist, and we'll try to get you some additional information. So with that, we just want to say thank you. You all continue to enjoy your day. All right, bye-bye.